Everybody starts somewhere. It takes a lot to succeed as a big Hollywood director. Talent, connections, a little bit of luck, and an unwavering belief that you can direct a feature film. But what do these directors all have in common? Today we're pulling the velvet curtain back on the humble beginnings of some of Hollywood's biggest directors. Blood Simple, 1984. When the Coen Brothers released Blood Simple in 1984, few people outside the film festival circuit had heard of them. A low-budget neo-noir shot in Texas for just over $1 million. Yet even in its earliest frames, the Coen style was unmistakable. Sweat, paranoia, and silence, all soaked in fluorescent light and moral decay. The story follows a small-town bar owner, his cheating wife, and the private detective hired to kill her lover. But like all great noir, it's less about murder than misunderstanding. A chain of double crosses where no one knows what's really happening. The film's title refers to what happens when you start thinking you're smarter than the situation you're in. It premiered at film festivals to strong critical attention and performed modestly at the box office, earning several times its budget but far from blockbuster numbers. It was a small success that positioned the Coens as sharp new voices in independent cinema. They would go on to write and direct movies like Fargo, The Big Lebowski, and No Country for Old Men, films that defined modern American storytelling. Over the years, they would go on to win 4 Academy Awards, including Best Picture, Best Director, and Best Screenplay for No Country for Old Men. Cinematographer Barry Sonnenfeld, who would go on to direct Men in Black amongst others, gives Blood Simple its pulsing visual identity. Humid, angular, and uncomfortably intimate. While the Coens' own writing and editing cemented their reputation as not just directors, but craftsmen of mood and rhythm, the movie remains a blueprint for aspiring filmmakers and everything that followed. Dark humor, brutal irony, and the illusion of control unraveling one bad decision at a time. A New Leaf, 1971. Elaine May didn't set out to direct A New Leaf. She'd written the screenplay from a short story by Jack Ritchie and planned to hand it off. But Paramount wanted a package deal. She could direct if she agreed to star, and for a fraction of her original fee. May accepted, partly out of curiosity, partly out of stubbornness. The result was one of the most unusual American comedies of the 1970s, a drawing room farce that keeps circling something far darker. Walter Matthau plays Henry Graham, a once wealthy Manhattan snob who's squandered his fortune and decides that marriage might be cheaper than bankruptcy. His target is Henrietta Lowell, a nervous, kind-hearted botanist played by May. He plans to marry her for her money and quietly arrange her disappearance. But as his plot unfolds, the movie shifts. It becomes less about murder than the quiet undoing of a man who mistakes cynicism for sophistication. Paramount nearly replaced May before shooting, wanting a more conventional leading lady, but she refused. The film was shot across New York and Maine, with May consulting real botanists to shape Henrietta's world. By the time editing began, her relationship with the studio had collapsed. Paramount cut more than 40 minutes from her version, including scenes she believed essential to its balance of comedy and cruelty. Despite the turmoil, A New Leaf drew strong reviews and turned a modest profit. It introduced May not just as a screenwriter with impeccable timing, but as a filmmaker with a singular voice, one who saw human weakness as both funny and fatal. She would follow it with The Heartbreak Kid, Mikey and Nicky, and Ishtar, each expanding her reputation as a director who made comedies that refused to play nice. Badlands, 1973. Terrence Malick's Badlands is one of those films that feels like it drifted in from another world. Quiet, dreamlike, and terrifying in its calmness. Inspired loosely by the real-life Starkweather Fugate murders of the 1950s, it follows 2 young drifters who leave a trail of bodies across the American Midwest. Martin Sheen plays Kit, a restless garbage collector with the charm of James Dean and the conscience of a ghost. Sissy Spacek is Holly, the teenage girl who follows him, narrating their crimes with the detachment of someone describing a vacation. Malick wasn't yet the reclusive figure he'd become, but Badlands already felt like the work of someone unconcerned with convention. Made on a shoestring budget in the Dakota Plains, shot mostly at magic hour to save on lighting costs. The natural light and empty landscapes gave the movie its strange beauty, violence set against the calm of open sky. Malick's background as a philosophy student shows in every frame. The murders seem less like a story and more like a meditation on innocence and delusion. The movie premiered at the New York Film Festival to quiet admiration but limited distribution. It wasn't an immediate commercial hit, yet critics recognized it as something rare, a debut with total control of tone. That reception launched Malick's career, though he would make only 2 films over the next decade, Days of Heaven and The Thin Red Line, both earning Academy Award nominations for direction and cinematography. Decades later, Badlands still feels untouched by time. Its violence is clinical, its beauty disorienting. Malick turned a killing spree into a kind of broken fairy tale, one where America's endless highways lead not to freedom, but to nowhere at all. Thief, 1981. Before Miami Vice made his style a trademark, Michael Mann announced himself with Thief, a hard-edged crime drama that feels like it was cut from glass and neon. James Caan stars as Frank, a professional safecracker in Chicago trying to buy his way out of the life he built. He's meticulous, disciplined, and terminally alone. A man who treats love and crime with the same mechanical precision. When he decides to go straight, his deal with a criminal syndicate becomes a slow-motion collapse. Every frame hums with his obsession for process. The tools, the timing, the ritual of breaking into a safe. The film's opening scene, a wordless break-in scored by Tangerine Dream's Electronic Pulse, sets the tone for the next 40 years of his work. You can see the DNA of Heat, Collateral, and Manhunter right there in the sparks and shadows. Shot on location in Chicago, wet asphalt, buzzing streetlights, and lonely diners at closing time. Mann's background in television and documentary gave him a sense of realism that few stylists ever manage. Caan, in one of his finest performances, makes Frank both defiant and doomed, a man who spent so long defining himself by his work that he has no idea who he is without it. Critics praised the film's precision and atmosphere, though it performed modestly at the box office. Over time, Thief grew into one of the most influential crime dramas of its era, establishing Mann's visual language, reflective surfaces, existential solitude, and characters who mistake professionalism for purpose. It's the story of a man trying to steal his own freedom, only to find that some cages are self-made. Fast Times at Ridgemont High, 1982. Fast Times arrived disguised as another teen comedy, loud, messy, and built for drive-ins. But what Amy Heckerling and screenwriter Cameron Crowe created was something a little sharper. Adapted from Crowe's undercover book about real California high school students, the film balances raunch and realism with surprising sensitivity. It's a portrait of suburban adolescence at the start of the Reagan era, when freedom still carried a hangover from the 70s but innocence was already fading. The ensemble cast, almost entirely unknown at the time, reads now like a time capsule of future stars. Sean Penn as the eternally stoned surfer Jeff Spicoli, Jennifer Jason Leigh as a freshman learning too much too soon, Judge Reinhold, Phoebe Cates, Forrest Whitaker, Nicolas Cage, and even Eric Stoltz. The film moves between them with a loose rhythm, catching glimpses of mall jobs, classroom boredom, and the small humiliations that make up real teenage life. Heckerling's direction keeps the film honest, steering it away from parody and toward empathy. The jokes land, but the emotions are real, especially in its quieter, uncomfortable moments. The infamous pool scene and the abortion subplot shocked critics expecting slapstick, and that honesty divided early audiences. Some dismissed it as vulgar, others recognized it as one of the first American comedies to treat teenagers as human beings instead of punchlines. The movie earned modest box office numbers, but became a cultural touchstone through home video and cable reruns. It inspired everything from Dazed and Confused to Clueless, another Heckerling classic, and redefined what a teen film could be. Not a fantasy of youth, but a memory of how it actually felt. It's nostalgia with bruises, disguised as a comedy that never stopped telling the truth. Following, 1998. Before Christopher Nolan was reassembling time itself, he was just a young filmmaker wandering London with a black and white camera and a few friends. Shot on weekends over the course of a year for barely $6,000, it tells the story of a struggling writer who begins following strangers through the city, searching for inspiration. What starts as curiosity turns into obsession when he's drawn into the orbit of a charismatic burglar named Cobb, and the simple act of watching becomes a crime of its own. The film's style is stripped to the bone. No score, natural light, and handheld photography that makes every street feel claustrophobic. Nolan edited the story out of sequence, using the fractured structure that would later define his other movies, like Memento and Inception. Even here, his fascination with identity and consequence is fully formed. The film's dialogue is cool and deliberate, every exchange revealing just enough to keep you guessing who's manipulating whom. Following premiered at festivals in 1998, critics compared its tension to classic noir, though Nolan was working closer to documentary realism than genre homage. The movie found its audience slowly, through word of mouth and home video, eventually landing him the budget to make Memento 2 years later, the movie that would really launch his career. The movie now feels like a map to everything Nolan would become: the obsession with time, the loneliness of his characters, the way control always slips away just when someone believes they've mastered it. It's the rare debut that feels less like a first film and more like a thesis, rough, patient, and already unmistakably Nolan. The Duellists, 1977. Ridley Scott's first feature began with a short story by Joseph Conrad and a production budget of barely $900,000. What emerged was a film of startling ambition, an 18th century drama about two French officers whose feud lasts across the Napoleonic Wars. Harvey Keitel plays Ferrot, proud and volatile. Keith Carradine is Dubert, a reluctant participant drawn back into a fight that outlives reason. Their rivalry unfolds over decades, in duels fought out of duty, ego, and something neither man can name. Scott came to Hollywood from the advertising world, where he'd built a reputation for crafting elaborate visuals on tight budgets. Working with cinematographer Frank Tidy, he brought that discipline to every frame. The movie's look, mist, firelight, and the pale skies of France, makes it feel painted rather than photographed. Shot mostly with natural light, its naturalism makes every duel feel inevitable, as if the characters are moving through a fate they no longer control. Premiering at Cannes in 1977, it won the festival's Best First Feature award and drew praise for its authenticity and atmosphere. Paramount released it only in limited runs, with just a handful of US prints, and box office returns were modest. But inside the industry, the film made an impression few debuts could match. Scott had delivered a historical epic for the cost of a single studio set, and proved he could command scope on a fraction of the usual resources. 2 years later, that reputation would earn him Alien in 1979, followed by Blade Runner in 1982. Both would expand on the same sensibility seen here: the collision of beauty and brutality, discipline and chaos. The Duellists may not have made Ridley Scott famous, but it's the reason Hollywood handed him the keys to bigger worlds. Night of the Living Dead, 1968. George A. Romero's career began with a regional horror movie shot outside Pittsburgh for less than $120,000. What he and his small crew made instead was a cultural event, a black and white nightmare that changed horror forever. The story is simple. A group of strangers barricade themselves inside a farmhouse as the dead inexplicably rise to feed on the living. But what made it unforgettable wasn't the monsters. It was the mood, the silence, the grain, the sense that this wasn't entertainment so much as a transmission from a collapsing world. Romero's cast was made up mostly of local actors and friends, led by Dwayne Jones as Ben, a calm, resourceful survivor trying to impose reason on chaos. Casting a black lead in 1968 wasn't a statement Romero planned, but it became one anyway. By the time the film's bleak ending unfolded, it mirrored the unrest of America itself. Civil rights protests, Vietnam, and televised violence bleeding into everyday life. Night of the Living Dead felt disturbingly real because it looked like news footage, not fantasy. The movie was released unrated, which meant children and families could buy tickets expecting a mild horror show. What they got instead was dismemberment, and an ending that left no room for comfort. Critics were divided. Some dismissed it as exploitation, others saw raw brilliance, but word of mouth turned it into a phenomenon. The film went on to earn over $30 million worldwide and inspired every modern zombie story that followed. Romero would return to this world again, with Dawn of the Dead and Day of the Dead, turning social commentary into blood-stained allegory. But the first film remains his masterpiece, a story about people trapped together, fighting to stay alive, only to realize the real horror isn't the dead outside. It's what fear does to the living. The Maltese Falcon, 1941. By 1941, detective movies were everywhere, but The Maltese Falcon gave the genre a new kind of authority. Written and directed by John Huston in his first outing behind the camera, it transformed Dashiell Hammett's hard-boiled novel into something lean, shadowed, and unmistakably mature. Humphrey Bogart plays private detective Sam Spade, a man who seems to know every angle until he's caught in one himself. When a mysterious woman hires him to recover a jeweled statuette, he's pulled into a maze of lies, greed, and murder. The plot twists endlessly, but what really holds the film together is its mood. Huston had been a screenwriter at Warner Brothers, and his meticulous planning showed. The result was a movie that moved like a machine, fast, efficient, and perfectly cynical. Shot on a modest budget of about $375,000, it earned more than 10 times that worldwide, proving that tough, adult storytelling could be as profitable as escapist fare. For Bogart, the film was a turning point. After years of playing gangsters and supporting roles, The Maltese Falcon transformed him into a leading man, the face of film noir. The supporting cast, Mary Astor, Peter Lorre, Sidney Greenstreet, gives the movie its texture, a rogues gallery of liars who still manage to seem human. The movie earned 3 Academy Award nominations and launched Huston into the front rank of directors, going on to be one of the most revered directors of his generation, with movies such as The Treasure of Sierra Madre, The African Queen, and Chinatown. It also set the tone for a decade of noir that would follow: cynical men, dangerous women, and stories where justice always costs too much. Reservoir Dogs, 1992. When Reservoir Dogs premiered at Sundance in 1992, it signaled that the independent film scene had teeth again. Quentin Tarantino's debut was made for roughly $1.2 million, financed through a patchwork of investors and industry favors, then shot over 5 weeks in Los Angeles. The story is simple on paper. A group of criminals meet for a diamond heist that goes wrong, then turn on each other while bleeding and hiding in a warehouse. But the film isn't about the job. It's about the fallout, the panic, and the shifting loyalties between men who live by a code no one can define. Tarantino wrote the screenplay and structured it like a jigsaw puzzle. It jumps between timelines and backstories, but the energy never drops. His writing turned low-level crooks into philosophers, mixing pop culture with profanity until both sounded like poetry. The cast, Harvey Keitel, Tim Roth, Steve Buscemi, Michael Madsen, and Lawrence Tierney, play it with the confidence of a seasoned ensemble. When it debuted, Reservoir Dogs performed modestly at the box office but earned widespread critical attention. Reviewers highlighted Tarantino's sharp dialogue, non-linear structure, and confidence behind the camera, a first feature that felt fully formed. The movie grossed just under $3 million in its initial run, but became a cult hit through word of mouth and home video, where its dialogue and soundtrack That mix of 1970s radio hits and casual brutality found a generation of imitators. Tarantino would follow it by writing True Romance the next year, and 2 years later he would make Pulp Fiction, which won the Palme d'Or at Cannes and changed the direction of American movies. But it started here, in a warehouse full of suits, guns, and bad decisions. A debut that made crime feel dangerous again.